We're doing the top 10 teachings of Brachos Daf Chaf Gimel. The first teaching is actually a story. I was invited to a congregant's wedding. I was not the officiating rabbi. That was a rabbi of another synagogue. And I was asked to do the last of the Sheva Brachos, which is the longest one. And during that bracha, in my tradition, in the Carlebach tradition, I sing it. Like it's Asher Bara Sasai V'Simcha Nai 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 Dida Dida Dam Gilarina Ditza Ditza V'Chadva Ava. So anyway, the rabbi who was officiating obviously knew who I was, and as I began the bracha and started putting a few musical notes into it, he leaned forward and whispered into my ear. He said, "Please make sure that the singing does not take any longer than the words." Now, what exactly was he telling me to do? What was he concerned about? So the truth is, we'll look in our Gemara and we'll see what he's concerned about. Our Gemara says the following. Our Gemara is actually talking about somebody who had to stop while they were doing shemon esrai because they had a little emergency. They had to urinate. And the Gemara first wants to say that perhaps there's a debate about whether or not the person has to repeat the shemon esrai. So at first the Gemara wants to say that maybe till it dried up or they felt comfortable starting again, it took, the interruption was longer than the actual time that they were praying, and that's why they would have to start over again. So the Gemara says no. Those two rabbis who disagree about this case where the person had this accident, they'd agree that under normal other circumstances, if somebody interrupted their prayer, the amount of time or greater than the actual time spent praying, they would have to begin again. The argument in the case of the accident is not, it didn't take that long. But yet, Demar Savar Gavra Chuyahi Ve'en Roi Ve'en Tfilas Tfila. The sage that says the person has to begin again holds that person was pushed away from prayer, meaning he was unable to pray. He was unfit to pray because he had to pee. Either because he should have, according to Rashi, we're going to learn more in more detail, because he knew he had to go. He should have made sure to relieve himself before beginning to daven, or just the very fact that he had this accident and he couldn't pray during that time. And once he had that kind of momentary inability to pray, then it's almost as if his prayer is like on a reset button. He has to start again. So therefore his prayer isn't an effective prayer, and he would start again. The other rabbi says he could continue. He doesn't have to go all the way back to the beginning. Perhaps he could start that bracha again. Would say that the person himself is fit. It's just a momentary inability to pray, but he himself is fit essentially, and he doesn't have to repeat the whole shemon esrai. So what this rabbi was essentially doing is he was extrapolating. He was familiar with this Talmud, and he understood this concept of a hefsek, of a interruption. Now, is the singing an interruption? That's a good question, but it's not, technically speaking, reading the prayer. It's a ay 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 ay. So I guess if while I'm singing, I'm saying the very words of the prayer, you could say that's not an interruption. But if I'm singing ay ay ay, then in this particular rabbi's opinion, it's an interruption. But the question is this a good analogy to draw from our Gemara and Daf Chaf Gimel in Brachos, which is talking about shemon esrai, for one of the Sheva Brachos? So let's take a look in some source material to see things like the Rambam and other heavy-duty people, what they have to say about it. So the first thing is learning using Meister Rav Kook's Gemara here, and I'm just gonna basically tell you that there's a debate between the Rambam and the Mechaber on the one side. That's the Mechaber is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and on the other side there is the Tur and the Ramah. And the first opinion of the Rambam and the Mechaber, they hold that this is only for tefillah. This is only for davening the shemon esrai on Shabbos or a weekday or Yom Tov, but it does not include Kriya Shema. And if the same thing happened during Kriya Shema, you would be able to continue Kriya Shema even if you interrupted Kriya Shema for the length of time that it would have taken to say it. It's also pretty clear from other Gemaras that this idea of interrupting, stopping to daven, would possibly make you have to start again, which, by the way, the poskim debate whether or not we rule like that, even by shemon esrei. So even though it seems like from our Gemara that that's the law, it's actually not necessarily the law, even for shemon esrei. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that it is, according to the opinions that it is. Those opinions would not necessarily agree by other things. So, for example, Hallel, Megillah, and Shofar, those three things specifically, it's pretty clear from the Gemara that if you interrupted even a sizable amount of time of an interruption, you do not have to begin again. You could start from where you left off. So it would seem from that the rabbi should have just left me alone and let me do my singing. However, in his defense, you do have the opinion of the Ramah and the Mechaber that say that this concept does apply to Kriya Shema, and then so in theory it might apply to other brachos as well, that you should at least definitely lechatchila, meaning the best scenario would be not to create an interruption. Let's flash forward. I do know of more contemporary poskim. I believe I saw it in Igros Moshe. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 95% sure. I didn't have time to look it up. That says that, in fact, what I usually do is fine. If you're singing and you don't have to have a timer. Say, you sang 5 seconds and you spoke 4 seconds and start all over again, and it's fine. So I believe that what I do is fine, and I also believe that what this rabbi would prefer is he's the Masada Kedushin, so he has every right to ask for whatever he wants. So we're all good. So that's number one. We continue with number 2 of the top 10 teachings, and that's about the Gavra Dechuya, this person that we just already mentioned, that in this case, why was he a Gavra Dechuya? Why was he a person that was pushed away from davening? The case is that he urinated during the davening. So it's kind of uncomfortable. To be honest with you, I haven't given this shiur in 10 days. And one of the reasons is because I've been a little bit busy, but there's another reason. This is a very strange blot of Gemara. It's all about defecating and weird smells during davening. And honestly, I just didn't have any energy to get into it. I finally got into it today after, 10 days of not really getting into it. And I have to say, it was great. It was fantastic. But I had this initial block for over a week into learning this blot well. So what is going on here? And Rashi actually says that the reason why he's not fit is kishehischel hispalel v'hayatzarech lenakvav dachoyhu mil hispalel. It was when he started praying, because he knew he had to go to the bathroom, so he wasn't fit to even pray at all. Hilkach mashi hispalel eina tefillah v'chosar rosh. Therefore, his prayer isn't a prayer. It sounds very similar to a famous Beis Halevi that talks about somebody who doesn't have the dalif ne'miyata omed. The Rambam says that the person has to have a minimum of the whole shemon esrei of know that he's standing before God. So in a sense, the lack of awareness that this person has, that you need to daven and not have to go to the bathroom at the same time, it's almost a contradiction. You have to go to the bathroom. Why are you davening? You should have taken care of that. So that's what Rashi says. The Rashba argues on Rashi. The Rashba says it's not about how you were when you started davening. You could have been fine, especially as I get older, and I have many people I know that it's not about checking themselves before davening. People have to go. The older they get, the more health complications they have. When you have to go, you have to go. You could have not had to go 10 minutes ago. Now it's an emergency. So the Rashba says it could be very well that the person didn't have to go when he started davening, and they're still considered dechuya, because once they went, at that moment, it's kind of like, ew, I can't daven while I'm urinating. And that moment of actually urinating is what the dechuya is from. I would just say psychologically, what that means is Rashi is putting it into the free will of the person. It's talking about a case where the person could have known better than to start davening, feeling that they had to go, and they should have prepared for that. The Rashba is saying there are certain accidents that happen, but once the accident happened, there's a certain violation of our will that happens to us because of an accident, a natural accident. And in that accident of nature, we get discombobulated, we get famished, and we can't be in the state of vechomer, of prayer, because we have to take care of a pressing, embarrassing need that we have. And both of them are different forms. One is where the person's still in the driver's seat and should have known better, and the other is the opposite, where there's a lack of control. That's number 2. Number 3 is about knowing what's right. And let's take a look at the Gemara to see what the Gemara is talking about here. So the Gemara is bringing a medrash down. And the reason why it's bringing this medrash is ultimately to give its own midrashic teaching. But before it gives its own midrashic teaching that's relevant for this particular page of Gemara, it brings down that verse and says another very fascinating teaching. So I'll read it to you inside. So it said, Rabbi Yochanan, guard your feet when you go to the house of the Lord. What does that mean? The rabbis interpret, guard yourself so that you don't sin. Ve'im sechta have carbon. But if you do sin, then you're going to bring an offering. Lefanai. Vikar of Lishmoa, and better if you would listen to the sages, he adds in the parentheses. Amar Rabba, have Vikar of Lishmoa, the Bechachamim, She'im Chotim, Avian Carbon, Va'osam Shuva. Listen to the rabbis. That way, if you sin, you'll do tshuva, and you'll bring a carbon. Meses Aksilim Zebach, then the fool's offering. Alti Kaksilim Shechotim, Aviim, Carbon, Ve'en Osam Shuva. Don't be like a fool that brings an offering, but doesn't do tshuva. Ke'enam yodim lasas ra. Because they don't know that. The end of the verse says they don't know how to do evil. The Gemara doesn't understand what that means, or pretends it doesn't. Yachi tzaddikin, if they don't know how to do evil, then they're righteous people. Ela altihi kaksilim shechotim aviyim karm ve'eni yodim im alatov hem aviyim im alara hem aviyim. Don't be like a fool that brings an offering without knowing whether you're bringing it for the good or for the bad. Meaning, is it a good offering or a sin offering? Vehem aviyim. They don't know the difference between good and bad, and they're bringing an offering before me. So the Gemara is going to give it an interpretation for number 4, which has to do with guarding yourself from when you pray, to make sure that you don't have to go to the bathroom. But that's not what I'm interested in right now. What I want to talk to you about right now is this midrashic reading of this text. The point that the Gemara wants to bring out in what I'm calling number 3 is you got to know right from wrong. You got to know what a lot of people, one of the most annoying things with certain people is they don't know right from wrong. It's usually very purposeful, meaning people would rather pretend not to know what's wrong. That way they don't have to ever fess up. They never have to ask for forgiveness. They never have to apologize. They can just pretend everything is good. It doesn't matter, or they don't know the difference. So it's kind of a defense mechanism. People who pretend that everything they do is either it's harmless or there's nothing to it. Those are actually very dangerous people. So that's what I think the Talmud is saying. But it goes a little deeper. There's such great stuff here. The Ibn Ezra says that the real fool that this verse is talking about is potentially such a fool that they don't even. They don't know bad. What does it mean? They don't know bad. They don't even have the natural born inclination, what we call the Yetzer Hara. It says, it says after God kind of destroyed the world in the flood, he had second thoughts about what he had done, because he realized he created the people rak ra min urav. He created us with the evil inclination from our beginning, so to speak. But guess what? What's worse than having an evil inclination is not even having an evil inclination. That's a real fool. There's certain things that the evil inclination drives us to do, and that need to be done. Not always, but often. And if somebody doesn't even have the evil inclination, that's the ultimate fool. So, for example, obviously an appetite can kill you. You can eat too much, but imagine you have no appetite at all. You'll die so much sooner. So that's one example. But die, whatever. You could figure that out on your own. But there's another thing. There's a lot on this. There's so much on this. But there is another thing here I wanted to say. This is kind of I don't want to call it a milsa de b'dichusa, a kind of funny thing. But the Shita Mikubetzes, this is not the real Shita Mikubetzes of it's a modern Shita Mikubetzes, the Hachadash, right? I get them confused sometimes. So he quotes this this Hadrush V'Ha'iyun, and I don't have time to get into it, but he kind of rereads this Gemara to poke fun at the Shita of the Rambam. We all about how Maimonides views Karbanot as essentially being something that we don't really need, just God had to give it to us to wean us away from idolatry. It's not the ultimate. So he learns the Gemara like this. He says, don't be like the Rambam that says we don't know the difference between why a carbon is brought, whether it's for good or for bad. Say it's for good. Be like the Ramban who says that we have a tachlis to bring a carbon. That's a good thing. I thought that was more funny than insightful, but interesting nonetheless. So that was number 3. Now we go on to number 4, which is 2 verses here that the Gemara uses to say that we have to prepare ourselves to pray to make sure we don't have to go to the bathroom before we pray. And in general, there's so much of this in this section of the Talmud begs the question of, was this just a halachic interest in and of itself that led them to spend so much time talking about this? Or is there some sociological, spiritual thing that they're addressing? And I believe it's both. So the Gemara says, first, a verse that I already skipped over says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hanitzrach l'nekavav hareza lo yispal. If you have to go to the bathroom, don't pray. Mishum shenamar, because it says in Amos, in the 4th chapter of Amos, Hachin likras elokecha, Yisrael. Prepare to meet your Lord, Israel. I believe the actual meaning of that verse, if you look it up, is not in a good way. It's like talking about the Jews have rebelled, and you're going to meet God, who's going to be upset, who's going to wage war, God forbid, in retaliation for our misdeeds. So it's not the pshuto shel mikra, but again, shivim panim l'Torah. There's many interpretations of the Torah. So one of the interpretations is prepare yourself to meet God. And what does that mean? Prepare yourself. If you were going into a meeting, there's a bunch of things you would do if the meeting was important to make sure that you wouldn't have to interrupt the meeting. You'd probably have your coffee before the meeting with enough time that you'd be fully up. You'd make sure to go to the bathroom before the meeting so that you didn't have that coffee wouldn't all of a sudden start gurgling in your stomach. You would do a bunch of things to make sure that once the meeting started, the focus would only be on the meeting. You know how much is riding on that meeting. The same thing can be said of davening, that when you daven, you know that it's so much riding on the relationship that you have with God, and therefore prepare. First, go to the bathroom, take care of yourself, and then after you've done all that, then you go ahead and daven. And then the next, the verse as well that we already read, another midrashic reading into this one as well, is that verse from Kohelet, that long number 3 that we did. Here it's Amashomar nakavecha b'shah sha'ata omed b'tefillah lefanai. He midrashically reads it says raglecha, guard your feet, but he midrashically interprets it to mean what happens. Your feet is what you can defecate out of. So guard your defecation, meaning make sure you go to the bathroom before you pray to me. So again, I want to understand the psychology here. So perhaps, I don't know, I haven't seen this anywhere, but I haven't looked at many places, so maybe somebody else can look for it and see if anyone else writes about it. We know that one of the most formidable challengers to the belief in God was the worship of the Bal Peor. Now, what is the Bal Peor? So it's one of the idols in the biblical times, in the times of Moses and the Jews, and after that the Talmud describes in great detail that the worshippers of the Bal Peor would defecate in front of it. And interestingly enough, commentators explain that the defecation may originally happened naturally, meaning they were in such a great state of awe that they lost control. They had a bowel movement out of a loss of control of their bodies. And in a sense, maybe you could arguably say that davening is the opposite of that. We clear our bodies out before we begin to daven, and we daven with control of our bodies so that we can focus on the higher things, on God, and not allow our religion to kind of make us lose control of something like that. That's just a thought. There's a lot. There's a lot of great stuff I have in Bal Peor. We'll save it for another time. Should I talk a little bit about the Bal Peor? Another time. Okay, number 5. The tragic death of one of the students and the rabbinic enactment that was made to address this. The Gemara says the following. This is talking about when a person is going to one of these outhouses. And again, it's kind of hard to understand many of these stories in the Talmud because the way their outhouses, or whatever the equivalent of what we're calling an outhouse, they didn't have running water. They didn't have many of the things we have today. And so you'd have to do your historic research to fully really understand this. And the question is, when people would go to relieve themselves, the custom was to wear tefillin all day. And they would take off their tefillin, and it was a balance between safeguarding the tefillin, and the main enemies of the tefillin were either thieves or mice or rats that would nibble at the tefillin. And here, it's a particularly nefarious type of thievery that ended in the death of one of the rabbinic students. Umayse b'talmud echad shehaniach tefillah b'churin asmuchim l'shus harabim. The story is a rabbinic student put his tefillin, as was the custom of that time, in, let's say, the cracks in the outhouse's wall that was next to the street. Uba'asa zona achas b'natlasan, and a certain promiscuous woman, a whore, I don't know how you say the zona in English, something like that. She took it, she stole it. And then later, Ubasa lebeit hamedrash v'amra ro'oi ma nasan li ploni b'schari. She said, look at what one of the yeshiva students paid me with as my payment for my services. Now, why would she do this? I don't know. I have no idea. She was a mean-spirited person. I don't know the answer. That's a very good question of why she would do this. But what did this young man do? This young man was very sensitive. He didn't deny it because maybe other people wouldn't have believed him, because usually the one thing you hold pretty close to the chest is tefillin. So how would she have gotten to his tefillin, right? So because he didn't know what to say, Kivan sheshama oso talmud. Once this student heard her accusations that he had paid her, I mean, that's like a double whammy. Not only did this guy hire me to sleep with him, he also paid me with his tefillin. That's a double baddie. So he heard this, he took it to heart. Obviously, he didn't do it. Kach Allah l'rosh hagag v'nafal v'meis. He went up to the top of the roof and he fell and he died. It's interesting, right? We usually call that suicide, but look at the Talmud. It's so sensitive. It says v'nafal v'meis. It doesn't say he jumped. It says he fell. We understand what it means, but I actually want to talk a little bit about halachic shifts in suicide in a more humane way of dealing with it than we used to have. But I actually didn't. I should have prepared that, and I didn't think about that. But that we'll leave that for another time, because the halacha now today, we understand mental illness a little bit better, and understand that many of the people, the tormented souls that do things like that, don't really have the freedom of choice that we used to ascribe to them. But anyway, this young man took his life all because of where his tefillin were. He was made vulnerable because of trying to keep his tefillin in a place that wasn't essentially safe, but it was for the honor of the tefillin, for not to taking them into the outhouse. So, ba'oso shahiskinu shehei ochsin bebigdo uviyado v'nichlas. At that time, the rabbis made a takana, they made an institution that people would be able to hold the tefillin in their hand or in their garment. The Gemara is going to actually record two different opinions of how to do that with Rabbi Akiva, and bring them into the outhouse. And that's because of this incident that happened. So, in general, we want the tefillin to be in a respectful place, but in particular, when push comes to shove, we're more concerned for the safety of the human being that's vulnerable than this person who killed himself or fell off the roof, so to speak. That type of thing shouldn't happen when we put our most precious possessions, our tefillin, in a place that they could be stolen, and then we could become vulnerable to this terrible story that happened. Wow, there's a lot of stuff in that story. It's powerful. It's very powerful. It does remind me a little bit of the story of Yehuda and Tamar, because that's a classic story where she says, from these who they are, I have become pregnant. Wow, maybe, I don't know, I'm just thinking, maybe this harlot became pregnant with somebody else, and she wanted to force this guy to, I don't know, marry her. I have no idea. I don't know what was the motive of this woman. Was it just pure evil? Was she blackmailing him for money? Did she want money? And I don't know the story, but it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. And at least the rabbis, it shows you the sensitivity that they reacted right away. But also Shah, the Gemara says, at that time, at that moment, they made this enactment. So, it's a lesson for rabbis that we have to, when things are happening in the world, we have to be ready to do something ba'oso shah, if that's what the time needs. Again, who are the rabbis? These were the great scholars. A lot of people have a great sense of humility that we can't act today. But then the greatest of the great, the most humble of the humble, the Reb Moshe Feinsteins, the Lubavitcher Rebbes, people like that, they in total humility are able to respond to the crises of the generation. Anyway, that was number 5. Now we go on to number 6, the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Nachman, who would hold on to the tefillan in the outhouse even when they had their students there. And why did they do this? So let's learn a little bit of Gemara here. So va'amar Rabba bar Chana, ki have azlinen basrei de Rabbi Yochanan, ki have a boy lemeil lebesakise, ki have a nuket sifra de agadata have a yoivlan. One of the students of Rabbi Yochanan reported that when we were together with our teacher Rabbi Yochanan, and he wanted to go to the bathroom, the outhouse, if he happened to be studying and had a manuscript of Agadata is usually Medrash or the Midrashic part of the Talmud. It's interesting why it's Sefer Agadata. What is that? It's interesting. What specifically type of Sefer is that? Is it literally Agadata Medrash or is it Gemara? Have a Yoivlan, he would give it to us before he went into the bathroom. Ki have a nuket tefillin, but when he had tefillin, lo have a yoivlan, he wouldn't give us a tefillin. Amar v'sharinu rabbanan, since the rabbis permitted it to be held when one goes to the bathroom. Again, this is not today. Today we have homes. Then the bathrooms were in public, really public places, like more public than even the closest equivalent I could think of today is the airport. But these bathrooms were out in the field. So again, there's very little we can necessarily learn specifically from taking. Maybe you could learn something about taking your backpack with tefillin with you into the airport today. That's the closest, and if you have no one else to guard it, that would be the only kind of practical carryover from this particular type of story. But anyway, let's continue. And the way to basically do that is to wrap it up in an extra bag that, besides for the regular bag that you have it in. So he says something about it would protect me. Rashi says the Hayal V'Shurner Rabbanan, since the rabbis permitted it, Nantiron, they'll protect me. Rashi says Yishmeruni, they'll guard me. Achnisim imi v'yishmeruni min hamazikin. I'll bring them in with me, and they'll keep me safe from mazikin, from like demons. So what this means, this is very problematic for somebody like the Rambam, but there's an easy answer. That means that people felt that tefillin had a magical powers to protect them from evil spirits. I have a friend. His name is I don't know if he wants his privacy, so I don't know if I'll say his name. But he did a lot of research. He wrote his PhD on 2,000 years ago, kind of the attitudes that people had, the kind of magical attitudes people had towards tefillin, giving them as a protective device, an element of protection from these type of things. And he found through his research support for this thesis. So the truth is, I mean, here you have this story. The Rashi says that they were holding on to the tefillin in the outhouse when they had students who could have held on to it, but they'd rather hold on to the tefillin in the outhouse to be safeguarded from demons by the power of the tefillin. Again, very problematic for Maimonides. The other way to read this Talmud is not so much that the man, the rabbi, there's two similar stories. One is with Rabbi Yochanan, the other with Rabbi Nachman, but they're essentially the same. So I'm not even going to read the one with Rabbi Nachman. It's the same. But that they're just, the rabbis permitted it, so I'm gonna show that I follow the rabbis, even though I have students told it. I'll guard them, not that they're guarded because of the tefillin. That's how Maimonides and others who follow his school would have to read it. But it is fascinating. Okay, so that was number 6. Number 7 is holding things while davening. Let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara says, number 7, Lo ye'alchez adam tefillin biyado v'sefer Torah b'zro'o v'yispalo. A person should not hold tefillin in his hand. We're not talking about when he has them on his hand, wrapped up. I'm talking about when they're wrapped, not on, but in his hand, holding them. Or a Torah, like you hold it in your arms. Don't hold those things and pray, because you can't have the proper intention, because you might drop them. You shouldn't urinate when you have those things, holding those things. You can't sleep with your tefillin on. Lo shinas kevav, lo shinas arai. Amar Shmuel. This is important. This is what I wanted to get to. Sakin umaot vikara vikikar. A knife, money, a plate, and a loaf of bread. These are similar to those things that were just mentioned, and that you cannot hold those items when you are davening. The question is, what about other items? What about a cell phone? What about keys? A wallet would probably go under the category of ma'ot, of money. A cell phone, I have issues with davening out of a cell phone, and it's not so much this, but initially when I first saw people davening out of a cell phone, I didn't, it wasn't clear to me that they were davening. I thought they were just addicted to their cell phones, and I don't know. First time I saw somebody using a cell phone during davening was many years ago. He was in the middle of shemon esrai, and he pulled out his cell phone in the middle of shemon esrai and started scrolling through his phone. I was like, wow, this guy really is addicted to his phone. So I actually asked him what was going on. He said, oh no, I took out my cell phone because I have the names of different people who need healing. So while I was davening, I opened up my cell phone to check the names of those sick people so I could have them in mind for Rifa'enu. To be honest, I thought that was problematic. Other people like me, and Maris Ayin, I don't know, it looked like he was just checking his texts in the middle of Shemon Esrei. B, this is an issue, holding things in your hand, like a cell phone. Cell phones are very expensive. So again, I don't know the halachic ruling that it's set in stone either way, that you can or you cannot. I think it depends, obviously. I think if you're in the middle of Shemon Esrei and you pull out your cell phone to start looking at something on your cell phone, I think that's very problematic. And I would, it's one thing if you started davening from a cell phone. I'm not a big fan of that, but it's okay. The younger people are all doing it, so it's just an inevitability. I give up on that one, But maybe if you're started to daven with something else and you're pulling out your cell phone in the middle, or you just want to hold it, that should be best avoided. Okay, that's a little bit about a cell phone. What about other things? So there's a machlokes between different authorities. Some authorities seem to indicate that it's like the type of things that are more likely to break that somebody's very careful about. Interestingly enough, the Rambam notes that your tefillin, your lulav and esrog on Sukkos, you're allowed to hold during Shemon Esrei, during the Chag, and the reason for that is it's part of the Chag. There's a lot of brisker Torahs on on the Gemara and the Medrash that talk about going in and out of the lulav, holding on the lulav the whole day of Sukkot, but that's for another time. Okay, so that's a little bit about number 7. Now we get to number 8, which is sometimes the analysis of facts are more important in determining the halacha than a rabbinic principle such as like vechomer. Now, what am I talking about? So the Gemara says the following. The Gemara is basically saying a distinction that a person has to be more careful in when somebody is just urinating and it's not such a serious outhouse, and they shouldn't hold a tefillan then, as opposed to when they're doing number 2, they're defecating in a real outhouse that's really like smelly, then they can hold a tefillin, which is counterintuitive. And the Gemara says the reason is because of basically like an shari. In a real outhouse where the person is defecating, we're not afraid of the droplets of the urine getting on things, and therefore it's permitted. But but if a person is just, let's say, peeing on a wall or something, and there's whatever's, in some unofficial setting, even we're afraid. We are afraid of the sprinkle, the little droplets, and the Gemara talks about why that's exactly a problem in other places, and therefore that would be forbidden. So the Gemara says, "Yachi amay enalav tshuva ma'asahi hachi kamar ha milsa teisel teres timer v'loy teisel bekavachaymer." And I'm just going to cut to the chase. The reason, if you reason it out, if you analyze it, if you get the facts straight, it makes sense. But it doesn't make sense if you're trying to figure it out from the normal deduction of what we call vechomer, something that's more serious, like the place of a outhouse is much more severe than just peeing in a regular place, and therefore I think for sure you're permitted to do it when you pee. That's a vechomer. That's a regular type of inference, but here the facts get in the way of that vechomer. Okay, so that's number 8. That even though the vechomer is a great methodology, but it doesn't always work. I mean, this is such a great Ishbitz Torah. The Ishbitz Torah is basically saying the whole of Ishbitz. I don't know the whole of Ishbitz is saying everything is about klal uprat, which means the principles, the generalities, and the situation, the actualities. And somebody who has a good grasp of one without the other is not a good rabbi. He doesn't know what they're doing. In other words, somebody who has lots of halachic principles but doesn't really grasp the unique nuance of each shaila, of each question, they're not getting the full answer. And I think that's what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying, kal v'chomer ahin, kal v'chomer aher. You got to have what's the time of this thing? What's the actual reasoning behind this situation? You can't always use halachic principles that are klalim, that are generalizations, when you have specific analysis that needs to take place that doesn't necessarily fit into some pre-existing category. It's just analysis of the facts in this particular situation. So that's very important in any rabbinic decision making. And this is a point that other people make in psak halacha, you got to get the details right. You can't just use fancy sources, but they don't actually match the situation validly. Okay, that was number 8. Now we get to number 9. Why can't you eat a meal in tefillin? And what about a snack? And what about a drink? So number 9 is the following. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak, hanichnas l'sudas keva cholotz tfilav. Rabbi Yitzchak says somebody who enters into a meal, proper meal, meaning keva means it's not just a snack. They take off their tefillin. V'achar kach nichnas, and then they go in. Pligad Rab Chia, dam Rab Chia. Manichin ala shulchan. Rabbi Chia says you could take it off at the table. You don't have to take it off in the other room. V'chein, I wish I wasn't so sloppy in underlying things, because now I can't read it. Anyway, the point is, Rashi explains why not. Important Rashi. Anichlis l'sudas kava v'gnaihu sheyitztarch. No, that's not the one. The fear is the person would get drunk during the meal, and it would be not unbecoming of the person and their tefillin to be drunk. It's disrespectful. So that would mean that maybe one single cookie, a small little cookie, is not a sudas kava, or one little little thing to eat is and actually there are poskim that paskin like Rashi that say you can't sit down for a meal, but you could have a small snack. You could eat an apple, but you can't eat a sandwich, or you can't eat a lot of mizonos. There are others, most notably the Meiri of the early scholars, the Rishonim, that say that you can't eat in tefillin. Period. Anyway, so that's a little bit of a debate, and let me see. I have some notes on this, maybe. Oh, so when it comes to drinking, almost everyone is lenient that you can have a drink, but that's only non-alcoholic beverages. When it comes to having an alcoholic beverage, the advice that's brought down by halachic authorities is, since Rashi's whole reasoning is that you might get drunk, you shouldn't make a l'chaim in tefillin. I don't know about if you're making like a little shot glass of schnapps that's like 1 ounce. I know a lot of people make a l'chaim after davening. I'm not sure that everyone's so makbid to take their tefillin off. Good question. Ask your local rabbi. Number 10, last but not least, the story of the father who hid his money in his son's tefillin bag. The Gemara says that it's a debate whether you could put money in the same handkerchief or cloth that you wrap your tefillin up in. And some say yes, some say no. The Gemara says, what's the difference of the opinions? And it says it's very simple. Ha da azamna v'ha la azamna. It depends if you were mezamein, the bag or the cloth that you keep your tefillin on, designated it as such to be your tefillin holder. If you did designate it as your tefillin holder, then you cannot put money in it. If you did not designate it as your tefillin holder, then you can put money on it. The story I wanted to tell is that there was a young man who went to Israel, I don't know for how long, and he had some money in his pocket, and then he spent the money, and then he was calling his father and says, Dad, I need money. And his father says, okay, I hear. He says, by the way, are you putting on tefillin? And the son said, yes. And this went on for like a couple of weeks, where every day the father, he'd ask the father, I need money, I'm out of money, can you send me some money? And the father would ask the son, have you been putting on tefillin? He would say yes. What was really going on is the father put, a nice envelope with $1,000 or something, a sizable amount of money, in the envelope, in his tefillin zekel, in his tefillin bag. And the boy actually didn't put on tefillin that whole time, and therefore he didn't see the envelope with all the money in it. The point of the story is that some people definitely do use their tefillin bag to put money in. And the truth is that the tefillin bag, almost everybody uses the actual tefillin bag for the tefillin. They think of it as exclusively for the tefillin. Unless you don't think of it like that, then you shouldn't be using it as an attaché case. Perhaps you can argue that the second covering, like the plastic covering, that most people have a second covering, if you purposely say, well, it's not for the tefillin, I'm holding this and other things in it, then that would be permitted. But it's a problem if you don't do it, it might be problematic. So the best thing to do is, when you get it, put something else in it right away and say, it's not just for my tefillin, it's just a bag, and I can put my tefillin in it, and I can put other things in it. It's all good. Thank you for watching.